Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. If you will be kind enough to take your seats, we will then start our meeting. So if you can close the door there, that would be fine. So it's a pleasure to welcome you this morning. We have a nice agenda. Outside, it's a sorry gray day. Inside, it will not be. It will be an active, positive day, and that is what we will try to do. And to set our meeting going, I will pass on to those who will tell us what we have to do. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davignon. Good morning, everyone. I'm Shada Islam. I'm Director of Policy at Friends of Europe, and I'm going to be moderating this session with my colleague, Giles Merritt. We have an exciting day ahead of us, and we're all looking forward to our conversation this morning with Mr. Frans Timmermans. He is, of course, the first Vice President of the European Commission. But before we go to Mr. Timmermans, I have the pleasure of introducing, and I have to get this right, Kensika Monchwengo. Kensika, good morning. You're the former director of the Irish National Consultative Committee on Racism and Interculturalism. And Kensika, now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll stand. I'll do something unconventional, I think. I'm guessing that you all have a piece of paper and a pen. Okay. I want you to put yourself in role-play mode, okay? I want you all now to imagine that we are here in Brussels, and there is a war in Brussels right now, okay? And we have 1 minute to leave this place. I want you, using your imagination, of course, you have the right to have only one bag, and in that bag, I want you to write 4 items that you will bring with you. So there will be a bus outside, okay? Will take us outside this place, away from this place. I want you to write 4 items that you will take with you, starting now. 30 seconds, please. Hurry, please. There's a war situation, so can you hurry, please? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Do you have your 4 items already? Please hurry. The bus is already outside waiting. We have to go. Please, please. There's a war situation. 4 items, please. Ready? Okay, we are already outside. We have to enter the bus, and we have to leave from Dublin to, from Brussels to Antwerp. But we have to give 1 item to the bus driver. I want you to cross whatever you're going to give to the bus driver. Cross it off your list, please. You should have 3 items left. Done? Okay, we are on this bus. We're going to Antwerp. We arrive there, and we hear that there's also a war in Antwerp. We have to leave Belgium. We have arranged a boat to go outside, to sail away from Belgium. Also, we have to give 1 item each to the captain. So just whatever you have, give it to the captain, please. 1 item. Done? Okay. We're sailing for 3 weeks. We arrive at a place called Port Harcourt. You all know where that is? Nigeria. Okay. We arrive in Nigeria, but unfortunately, we cannot stay in Nigeria. Again, we've arranged a plane to leave Nigeria. I want you to give 1 item to the pilot, please. 1 item to the pilot. Done? Okay. Now, from Nigeria, we go to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, that's a safe place for you. you can, because you're human beings, you have the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution, okay? So I want you to do just that. With the one item you have left in your bag, I want you to seek asylum in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Of course, I'm not going to be able to do the role play with everybody here, but I'll ask maybe this row here as volunteers, if you don't mind, just stand up. Just the 20 or 10 people here on this row, please stand up. Okay. So now, still, you put yourself in the role play mode. Okay. I am the immigration officer from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I want you to seek asylum. I want you to tell me why you're here and why I should grant you asylum. Okay. The question I'll ask you first, yeah, sir. I'm putting you on the spot, but it's okay. You first. Tell me why you're here and why should I grant you asylum?
It's fine, thank you. Morning, sir. I just arrived after a very long trip from Belgium, where there is a war currently. I am a citizen from Catalonia, and I would like to get asylum.
Okay, na yoki makamnyo suzuluba kasinazowe kate makamozoluba pu awa toloba ka Catalonia te toloba ka Lingala, Kiswahili, Kikongo, Chiluba. We have a problem here. What kind of problem do we have? Obviously language. So how are we going to solve that problem? Okay, let's say we find an interpreter or an immigration officer who speaks English. Good morning, sir. I can see that you're from Europe, given your complexion. Are you from France, Italy, Belgium, Catalonia, or?
Morning, sir. Asante sana.
Oh, wow, you speak Swahili, so yeah, already you have a language, so it's going to be better for integration in this country. So why did you choose Congo?
I chose Congo because I've been told that this is a welcoming country. There is peace and stability. It was not the case years ago, but now you are luckier than we are in Europe nowadays.
You know, what do you have in your bag? I see you have carrying a bag. Do you have something to show that you are from Europe?
Yes, I only have one thing with me, and it's my wallet, and I have my identity card.
Okay. Okay, but there's nothing to prove that you are in fear of persecution. And what I think is that you chose this country because of a generous benefit. You know, the generous social welfare system in the Congo is well known around the world. So, sir, you didn't show a well-founded fear of persecution, so I think I'll reject your application. Thank you. Madam, what can I do for you?
Ninataka kusafiri na Congo.
Oh wow! Okay, you have the language, so you seem too well prepared. For somebody who came by accident, how can you have the language? Do you have your passport with you?
No.
No, you have no form of identification. So how would I know that you're Irish or Belgium? You know, for me, all white people look alike. You know, on the photograph, you all look the same to me. So how can I know you're Belgium or French? It's very difficult for me to know that. So really, I will reject your application. Next person, please. Okay.
Already failed.
Oh, you already failed the application process. So, sir, yes, what can I do for you?
Yes, I'm from Britain or Europe, and I have a persecution there, and the best thing I could do is get here, and I would like to apply for asylum, please.
But what, you have your passport with you?
Nope.
No form of identification. Again, how will I ascertain that you're really who you are?
Look, it's been difficult.
Your claim is obviously manifestly unfounded, so sorry, I have to reject your application, sorry. So people are coming here because of our general social welfare system, as you know, and you're choosing to come to the Congo. That's why you're too well prepared. This is just incredible. Yes, sir.
Good morning. I am an EU citizen, Jean-Claude Piris, and I am failing because I have not my passport with me. I have only my iPhone.
Oh. If you're willing to give that to an honest immigration officer, we may...
Okay, we can make an arrangement.
Okay, thank you very much for playing this game. You may sit down. I think you get the point. Thank you.
Indeed, Kenseka, thank you very much. You did make your point. You made it forcefully and you made it with humor. Thank you very much indeed. May I now ask Monsieur Etienne Davignon and Frans Timmermans to please come up to the podium and take their seats. Kenseka, thank you very much. Mr. Timmermans, now that you're seated down, I want you to give us your impression, your feelings after what you've seen. I know that you're very committed to the question. You've said some very moving things, in fact, some of which I've heard about European values, the need for tolerance. You've said diversity is humanity's destiny. But things keep getting bad and worse and worse. The news every day is terrible. Your thoughts, please.
Well, first of all, for some time now, the determining factor in European politics has been fear. And you know, it's a psychological fact that if fear dominates, people go looking for confirmation that their fear is justified and are not open for elements that would counter that fear. So what you see across Europe is the politics of fear being exploited by certain political movements. And we gave that space to them because we, as politicians of the middle of the center, abandoned a speech based on our values. We became too practical about things. We started talking in terms of practical solutions like engineers instead of politicians. And that created a situation where those who cater on fear have become ideological, are talking about values, their values, which are not my values, but we don't have a clash of values in this debate. We have, especially the extreme right, advocating Europe to go back to the 1950s, portraying a past that never was as sort of an alluring future that, of course, because the past never was, will never be. But still, they take people to a place where their fears are catered to instead of giving them hope that we can find solutions. And that I think today is our biggest challenge. Combined with that is the move to try and dehumanize refugees by saying, they're not real refugees, they're economic migrants, or by saying, well, some of them are jihadis, so let's keep all of them out. And as long as you can make sure that our citizens see the human being behind the refugee, we'll be all right. And that is why I so much like the exercise just done. You know, if politicians would speak about refugees in terms of what would you do if you were in the same situation, then I think we could win this debate. But if we keep talking about them as asylum seekers, people looking for a better future, people playing games, people not playing by the rules, then we take away part of their humanity and give reason to those who don't want to face the problem by saying, let's close the borders and keep everyone out.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. It's about humanity, it's about people. In fact, popular support, public support has been quite strong, though of course there are extremist elements as well. So thank you for your response, Mr. Timmermans. Monsieur Davignon, you have a question for Mr. Timmermans as well.
Yes, the first thing I would like to do is to commend point which we have to restore pride in our strategy. We've lost pride. We mustn't boast about what we've done, but we must not be ashamed about what we've done. We've done extraordinary things. And I believe it would be interesting, to see if you share that analysis both of the need and of complication, and how all of us can contribute to the result.
Well, I think two fundamental challenges we face is, first of all, that at all sorts of levels in our society, it's not just pride we've lost. I could do without pride, but a certain measure of self-confidence would be useful. We have no self-confidence whatsoever. And this happens at all levels of our society. No self-confidence that Europe can face the future, especially in the middle classes in Europe, that they will not be faced only with decline, because that's the biggest fear. That's driving, political developments are driven from the middle, always, in a society like the European society. Not bottom up, not top down, it's radiating from the middle, and the middle lacks every self-confidence, because people, for the first time since the Second World War, arguably, now feel in the middle that their children might be worse off than they are today, and that creates a certain attitude of lacking self-confidence, and this permeates in all our political structures, obviously. And the second problem, which is a more day-to-day problem for people in my position, is that there is quite a strong lack of trust between member states. And this, of course, happened during the financial crisis. Look at the Stability Pact. That was the first demonstration of a lack of trust. We have an agreement, but some states are more equal than others when it comes to applying the agreement. We need to get out of this, and this whole debate we've seen in the last 5 to 6 years of some Southern Europeans portraying the north of Europe as sort of neo-Nazi misers who don't want to see that austerity is just killing everything, and in Northern Europe, people portraying people in Southern Europe as too lazy to work and retiring at 50 and spending all the time at the beach drinking ouzo. Complete caricatures of each other that have fed into the public debate and the political debate, and now we don't trust each other. I mean, just look, one simple example, one practical example. Just look at the conclusions of the European Council. Compare the conclusions of the European Council today with the conclusions of the European Council, let's say, 15 years ago. Every element of unclarity now needs to be negotiated at the highest level so that not one word could be construed in a different way. That's a manifestation of distrust between member states. You no longer have general conclusions because you want to be sure that what you agree is what you agree and nothing more, nothing less. So I think if politicians at the highest level demonstrate such a lack of trust in each other, how do you think the population will react to that? And we are back in a situation in Europe where we've lost track of what we share or the common destiny we should be building, and we're looking again especially at the differences between us, and this is an old European illness, that whenever we're in trouble we go look for scapegoats, we go look for differences, and we lose track of what is really important.
So it's not just a policy crossroads, as we say in our program, but it's also an identity crossroads that Europe is facing.
Well, I think we're in an existential crisis on different levels, and this is arguably the first time in my professional life that I think we're talking about the very future of the project, not about the content or elements, but I think the challenge to the European project today is existential. I don't want to sound alarmist, but I think it's the refugee crisis has brought that to light. What was unimaginable before now becomes imaginable, namely the disintegration of the European project. It is no longer just something people write about in science fiction.
Those are somber words indeed, Mr. Timmermans. I'm going to open the conversation because there are many people here who have specific questions to you. But before I do that, I'm going to ask our team, Debate in Europe team, to please put up the video the recording we did with Alan from Estonia. He has a question for you, Mr. Timmermans. So Alan from Estonia has a question which I think is about a real problem facing Europe. It's about young people and their role in society. Here we go.
I want to ask you a question about politics, really. We know that populist parties are gaining more and more votes, and it's often due to the fact that European Union is distrusted among its citizens. Young people are especially concerned here. So what will you do to make sure that more information, more actual information is given out to citizens, especially to young people, so that they can participate in politics?
Well, actually, he's from a country where, and I want to salute the president of that country who's with us today. He's from a country where the trust in Europe is extremely high. Why? Because they have such a vivid memory of what it is to not be able to be master of your own destiny and to be under occupation for so long. So the belief in Europe is very strong. Now, I believe that the European idea, the European ideals, still has very strong support among the population. Across Europe, what does not have strong support is European politicians and European politics. And so, you know, if you're more pessimistic in nature, you look at the last element. If you're more optimistic in nature, which I think is an obligation of politicians to be, you would look at the first element. So we have something to work with, namely the belief that Europe is still something that could be a positive contribution to our future. Now, how do we then fix politics? And I'm sorry, it's not about communicating Europe. That's been done. It's right. You know, it's sometimes I feel, especially in the organization I now represent, that we still believe that, you know, it's like when you meet somebody who doesn't speak your language, and you say something to the person and they react sort of blank with a blank face. So your first impulse is to say the same thing but slowly and louder. But if they don't speak your language, they won't understand what you're saying. And I think this has been the communication strategy of the EU for too long. So we need to be there where the people are, not talking about the general elements, but about the values we represent and why it is necessary that we find European solutions to European problems such as the refugee crisis. And not just, you know, propaganda fide will not work. We tried, it doesn't work. But if we are, like we're trying to do as a commission now, if we are leading on policies, if we're leading on setting the agenda, if we're leading on showing that we can actually perform, then perhaps we will be convincing to young people. One more remark about young people, which is something I worry about a lot. We have now in Europe the healthiest, the best educated, the best networked generation in our history. So that is a very, very good starting position. But what I also see is that they lack some of my generation's capability of organization, of getting this organized. Because sometimes the feeling is that if you put it on Facebook, if you say it on the internet, that's well enough. But, you know, society needs more structure and organization if you really want to change things. And my biggest worry about the youngest generation is that, like we are doing here a bit today, I'm sorry to say, is that they all stick together with people who already agree, with their own social group, in their own ethnic group or social group, etc. And there is less and less contact with other groups. I can even quote my own family. My two oldest children live in completely different social contexts, and they have different worlds. They have different worlds, different ideas, and it's becoming more and more difficult to make sure that there is solidarity between these groups. And that is what is ailing, I think, European society, that we are sort of getting into silos, different silos of people who live the same lives, and that there is less and less understanding for people who live different lives, either on ethnic grounds, social grounds, economic grounds. And if we want to recreate a political Europe, we have to make sure that these silos don't develop further in society.
All I'd say to that, Mr. Timmins, you're absolutely right, but these silos tend to be global silos.
Yes, oh yes. Unfortunately, it's not just a European problem.
That's right. Thank you very much. So I'd like to open the floor to all of us here. We're going to have a conversation, Mr. Timmins. I'm going to take one question at a time. put it to you. And I'm going to make a plea, brutal plea, if I may say so, for brevity and getting to the point very quickly. We don't want at this point any long declarations or comments. Just, we have Mr. Timmermans here actually till 10:15. He has to leave then. So let's make it quick and snappy, and I'm happy to start taking questions. Please identify yourselves. I know most of you, but Mr. Timmermans may not. So please, who's ready to go first? Yes, put up your hand, of course, if I don't see you putting up your hand. So I have Jim Clarkin first, please, and then I'll go to you. Yeah. Yes?
Good morning, I'm Jim Clarkin from Oxfam. I'd just like to challenge the narrative a bit here. And I suppose, going back to your point, we're very happy to be in this room as Oxfam. And unlike we wouldn't normally be in a gathering like this. So I think we are mixing it up a little bit, and it's much appreciated by the Friends of Europe that have given us space to be part of these important dialogues. I think all this talk of a refugee crisis in Europe is actually inaccurate. A few 100,000 people who are desperately fleeing conflict and certain death in many cases, coming to the wealthiest place on the planet of 500 million people isn't a crisis. When you have 1 million people going to the Lebanon and a quarter of the entire population having refugee status, that's a crisis. So I think that
Jim, you have to, I'm sorry to break in, but you have to be very, very brief.
Very quickly, I think what we need to see, the public have been miles ahead of the political establishment here. They have shown their own leadership. And what we really need to see now is a bit of courage, knowing that those people are behind the leadership, are behind this movement, are interested in supporting, and stretch out that humanity and talk about the Europe that we have all believed in, that we've all been part of, we've all benefited from.
Right. Thank you, Jim. Mr. Timmermans.
I'm afraid, well, apparently we don't agree. I think Oxfam will have a problem with its own constituents. Like any organization in our society has a problem with constituents. We all have that. That's my first remark. Secondly, apparently you only see what you want to see, I'm sorry to say. Mr. Orban's policies in Hungary are supported by more than 3/4 of the population. So this leadership you're talking about is not something that you see in all parts of European society. Neither do we see it in those countries who are still, I think I'm a great admirer of Mrs. Merkel's leadership, but you see how much trouble she gets into with her own party and her own society for doing this. So I wish it were true, what you're saying, that the population is supporting politicians all going that way, but I'm afraid that's not the reality in European society. That being said, I still believe that if we have the courage, and I think the Commission is not to blame in this, I think we're trying, have the courage to only talk about refugees as human beings. You will relate with the people in the European public. They will, but we need to prove that we have instruments to get this under control, because the problem people have across Europe with the issue is not the amounts of people coming now, but the fear that more millions will come and that we don't know how to handle this. And frankly, we don't if we don't change some of our policies. We will have to find ways of handling this. And then, of course, let me just mention at the end, the elephant in the room. Islamophobia is a big deal in this whole thing. If you look at the numbers we're receiving today and you compare them with the numbers we had in the 90s, it's only half of what we had then, but that is neither here nor there for people because they fear the nature of the people coming, bringing what they see as their ideology. So the public debate in Europe has been poisoned over a decade with Islamophobia, and now, this is something that people have put in their minds. I see it in my own country. Oh, well, my daughter's going to be raped if all these people come here. I mean, that's the sort of thing that has been created in European society, and we need to face that as well.
Well, thank you for being very blunt on that. And actually, I was at that fundamental rights colloquium that you held earlier this month, where you put anti-Semitism and Islamophobia together. And I thought that was a great, great initiative. So I'd like to really compliment you on that. I had a question here from the left, please. Yes, please.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Daniel Costello, je suis l'ambassadeur désigné du Canada à l'UE. Je viens d'arriver il y a 5 semaines. I want to thank you, Vice President, for your lucidity and for putting your finger on this point about no self-confidence to face the future. I'll be very brief and say, look, I've got 4 sisters, and I've seen existential crises. Sometimes, in one case, it had to do with a messy divorce. In another, it had to do with a bad haircut. Pardon me if it sounds like a pep talk, but my question is about the role for external partners who can't stand to see you do this to yourselves. I don't wish to diminish the gravity and the magnitude of the problem, but what do we do as individuals when we're lacking self-confidence? We talk to our friends and our family, and we are your friends and your family, and we want to scream because we trust in you, we admire what you've achieved, we don't want to see you turn inward on yourself in the equivalent of run upstairs and close the door to your room. We need you. We want you to appreciate what you've achieved.
You'll have to be briefer than that, and congratulations, by the way, on
We're facing global strategic challenges together with an assertive Russia and a rising Asia. How can we, your partners, in practical ways, help you through this?
Yes.
That's my question.
And congratulations on the election of Justin Trudeau, by the way. Mr. Timmins.
One of the most likable people I know has just won the elections in Canada, and which I think is one of the elements of hope and positivity that we could arguably use in Europe. But let me be very concrete. One of the answers to this refugee crisis is a global resettlement program of a much larger scale than UNHCR is operating today. And there the European Union could do much more with much higher numbers, only if countries like the United States and Canada and Australia and all the others in the Western world would join us in that effort. If you just imagine you could resettle over 1 million people a year, you would take out the smugglers, you would take out all this human misery of people swimming across frozen rivers, etc., etc. Freezing rivers. You need really to take another look at the measures that are already there in principle, but that we're not using to the full extent. So just very concrete answer to your concrete question, why not have a global conference on resettlement and then go to real numbers in resettlement and not just 10,000 or 20,000 for a whole continent?
Thank you. Mario Monti, please.
Like President Davignon, I congratulate the Juncker Commission and yourself, Vice President Timmermans, for regaining central ground and driving force in the European process. This was essential, and apparently it has come. You defined the role of the Commission with 3 little words, which are key. You said leading on policy. As you know, many in Europe wanted, and now apparently got, a more political commission. But also many national leaders interpret a more political commission in the sense of it being more open also to political pressures from national governments as regards the exercise of the enforcement functions of the European Commission. I would add that for all its advantages, I'm not sure that the communication of the Commission on flexibility helped to encourage governments to stay rigorous. My last observation is we have witnessed, perhaps as a response to a more political commission, an unprecedented degree of insults from national leaders to, not to you or President Juncker, but to the bunch of bureaucrats. How do you live this situation, and how can this more political and more flexible approach to enforcement go on without undermining the credibility and the image of impartiality of the European Commission?
Thank you, Mario.
First of all, if the European Commission is not about enforcing the rules and being the guardian of the treaty, there's no point of being a political commission. Then you become a political party. We are an institution with a very strong responsibility as far as implementing EU rules is concerned. I see the risk you mentioned about introducing flexibility, but we're not introducing it. We're making explicit what was already there in the treaties. And we need to strike, if you really want, I'm very worried about the economic situation in Europe, because even in this situation of very low oil prices very low banking rates, we are still not growing 4% a year, which normally would be the case in these exceptional conditions. So we have a lot of reform to do. So we need to strike a balance between fiscal discipline, structural reform, and investment. Now, this commission, the first thing we did was to try and get investment to a much higher level. I think we've succeeded. We're now waiting for good projects because many public authorities have lost the taste of big projects in these crisis years, but we need big projects that will take the European economy into the next revolution, which is the circular economy. We need these things very quickly. But we also need to stay firm with member states on fiscal discipline. And it will not do for member states, some of which you know very well, to simply say to the Commission, we will send you our plans, and if you don't like them, we will send them again. The Commission will have to enforce these rules. And you know, you've seen the row with Spain over the last week. I'm very sorry. The Commission is just enforcing the rules. It's just saying what we've agreed at the European level. And even if this leads to rows, we will continue doing this. By the way, we have also stepped up our infringement procedures against member states who don't apply the rules, because there's been, in the last couple of years, the feeling that we, because of the crisis, have become less strict also in enforcing the rules. And also on migration, we have stepped up hugely our infringement procedures against member states. And, well, look at what we are trying to do to combat fiscal dumping. Who would have thought a few months ago that we could use the state aid instrument to also go after member states who engage in fiscal dumping, some of whom I know quite well.
Thank you. Giles Merritt, please.
Yes, a follow-up, Mr. Timmermans, to Mario Monti's question on policy. What is the Commission doing on analysing and defining the problem? The last few months have been chaotic. The statistics are confusing and most of them very unreliable. So, first question, has the Commission got a hold of this, and is it going to put out, within a reasonably short space of time, a clear analysis of how many migrants there are? Because so far all we've really seen is the Commission on burden sharing quotas and so on. Second question, which comes back a bit to Mario's question, when are we going to see the Commission outlining something that looks like a longer-term strategy? Because most of us don't think that this crisis is going to stop at the end of this year.
Well, let's be very clear. This crisis is going to be with us for at least a generation. This continent has gone from being a continent of departure to becoming a continent of arrival, but this is not yet settled in our collective psyche. So we need to get used to the fact that this continent, for good reason, has become a continent of arrival. Look at our demographic development. It's not a bad development. It's a positive development if you're able to manage it. Of course, the Commission will put forward, as we've announced, a number of proposals for structural handling of the issue. I think in emergency situations, the reallocation of refugees should be a structural measure, not just a one-off. Not all member states agree, and I say this with a little sense of irony. Not all agree, but I think this is the direction we need to go. We need to have a much better functioning system of legal migration. Legal migration will have to be an element of solving the issue so that less people feel the need to abuse the asylum system. We need to have, I have to say, frankly, a tougher stance with some third countries about taking their nationals back who don't have the right to asylum. One of the reasons why the European public distrust us with asylum policy is that, first of all, a too high percentage of people abuse the asylum system, and secondly, those who are caught abusing it are not really sent back to where they come from. So we need, if you really want to do something about refugees in the long term, you need to make sure that less people abuse the system and more people return to the countries of origin. And I'm afraid to do that, we will have to take a tougher stance with certain third countries. We need European border protection. We need to do better at that. We need to protect our external border in a better way, and I believe we need a European Coast Guard for that. So those are proposals we will put on the table to create a more, to provide a more structural answer to this issue. But the worst thing we could do is to present a picture to the European population. If we take these measures, and I mentioned resettlement before, but if we take all these measures, this whole thing will stop. It's not going to stop. We need to prepare, we need to have the courage to prepare our population for the fact that migration and some refugee crises will be with us for a long time to come.
Thank you very much. Please.
Good morning. My name is Stefan Phil, a former commissioner. The European Union at the current stage is a union of member states. Whenever there is a bad weather or some challenges, the first sense is to approach this issue at the national level. The financial crisis has shown it, and the migration has exposed it. So how to tackle this dilemma? That on one side, we created the impression that we have the EU policy instruments, institutions to tackle the challenges to Europe. But on the side, those are the member states delivering, implementing. And at the time of the crisis and bad weather, the record shows it's actually not enough.
Well, I think this is almost a philosophical question. I think given the urgencies of the last, let's say, 30 years, 26, 27 years, the reasons why we took the steps we took, and I think were necessary, the speed with which Europe enlarged, the speed with which we went in other policy directions, have prevented us from having a collective debate on what is actually the nature of Europe. How do you see Europe? You know, the very fact that David Cameron insists so much on I want ever closer union to be removed from the treaty, whatever you might think of the merits of this request, shows that he actually is asking for a debate about how do member states see our collective European future. And I think because of the urgencies, we did take the time, also not with the new member states, Stefan, to actually see what do you see as European destiny in this. And I think we are coming from different positions. Somebody in Germany and in France has a different perspective on this than somebody in the UK or somebody in the Czech Republic or elsewhere. And I believe it's high time that we would find the courage to have a debate about this. Because as long as we don't have a debate about this, we leave national politicians, we leave all the room for people to create their own idea, and then Europe in many member states becomes sort of the detergent you put out of the cupboard when you have a problem and you put it in the washing machine, and then you put it back in the cupboard. That Europe comes with advantages and disadvantages is something we will have to face collectively. I think we would not be facing this level of crisis in the Balkans today with the refugees if Hungary had not gone down the road of selfishly just putting fences across its borders. And at the end of the day, this is not in Hungary's interest to do it that way. I think they'll find out, but at what expense is it necessary to go through all of that?
Thank you very much. Please, lady over there, yes.
Hello, my name is Ana Terron, and for that discussion, let me introduce myself by saying that I have been State Secretary of Migration in the Spanish government. 16 years ago, the Commission published a paper saying that in order to guarantee freedom of movement, security, and the application of our values, we had to complete this space of security, justice, and freedom. And we needed a common policy of migration and a common policy of asylum. So we don't have it. We are living a crisis, but it's not an unexpected crisis. We knew since many, many years ago that part of the system we would need to tackle such a situation is not existing, And we know, at least since 5 years ago, that there is a serious crisis and a serious situation around Europe in the Mediterranean.
And could you ask your question,
yes,
please?
I go to the question
Thank you.
immediately. We know what do we have to do. We know Dublin is not working, and we know that the leadership for going ahead is not going to come from the Interior Affairs Council of Ministers. We need to gather stakeholders in order to move on, because as you said, and thank you for your words, otherwise we will go back. How the Commission think that that can be done in the nearly future, and do you think that you can lead this process, and by the process I mean to complete this space of freedom, justice and security? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we will certainly try, and we've done so, I think, in the last couple of months. It's always the Commission's proposals that are the basis for debate, and very often they are also the basis for conclusions. So we will keep pushing for that. And the complexity of the issue is not the individual measures we know we need to take. And Spain has some interesting experiences there in dealing with the refugees and the crisis, or the dealings with third countries that were very successful, and we can learn from that and profit from that. The complexity is not in the individual measures. The complexity is in the fact that you need to take all these measures swiftly, all at the same time, with different competences. Some European, very limited, unfortunately, many national, some subnational, some even at the level of municipalities. So the challenge here is not the complexity of the content of the individual measures. The challenge here is really governance. How do you get this adopted and implemented at all these levels in 28 different member states, and then again with all these countries surrounding us at the same time? And that will be the biggest challenge in the next couple of months. And you know, I went to Turkey last week to see if we can come to terms with Turkey on an action plan to handle this together. And then I'm also incredibly surprised by the criticism you then get. The same people saying you should not have an agreement with Turkey are saying all these refugees should stay in Turkey. Well, yeah, how do you want this to happen if you don't have an agreement with Turkey? So, you know, we will need to face the fact that we cannot begin to solve this issue with the Syrian refugees without the Turks, and the Turks are very conscious of the fact that they cannot solve this without the European Union. So there is here a basis for understanding, and all these things need to be done immediately. And the big problem of European governance in general, not just in the refugee crisis, is that the speed of governance, the speed of lawmaking, the speed of decision-making is completely out of sync with the speed in which society changes, which I think is the biggest speed in human history, certainly in Europe. So if and that's why we're losing many of our voters, because what they see is society changing so much and governance not being able to manage that change or to steer that change, because we are so much slower than what is happening out there. And that applies to refugees, to international security, to economic transformation, to the energy issue. If we're not very careful, we're always too slow. And then people start blaming democracy for being too slow and pointing to autocratic leaders elsewhere in the world, saying, hey, at least they do something. And that is really, I think, a fundamental challenge to the way our society is organized.
Thank you very much. Gentleman over there, please. Yes. May I just say, I'm not going to be able to take all questions, but the conversation does not stop at 10:15 when Mr. Timmermans leaves. There will be room for, we will be talking until 11 o'clock, so please be patient with me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. My question is rather simple, what to do about what you described. But to define it more precisely, let me go through very briefly the 3 stages.
I won't have time to take 3 stages.
Sorry. No. 3 points. Very.
You will have to be very brief.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But what to do is no question. The first thing is that EU structures proved not to be sufficient to face the problems, eurozone crisis, refugee crisis, and so on. failure generates blame games, Greeks, lazy bastards, Germans, Nazis, which create mistrust. And then mistrust presents another obstacle in moving in the right direction of further unification. So we're in a vicious circle. The question is how to break it. Who takes the lead?
Okay.
The Commission, in the way Mario Giles suggested, by promoting more systematic work to face the problems, or a more wide-ranging national appeal by leaders, just like the German Chancellor or the French President? This is what I would like to have your thoughts about how to break this vicious circle.
Oh, I'm sorry, it will engage everyone, and not just people in politics, people in civil society. Oxfam has a huge role to play in this. I received a delegation of filmmakers, and they were pleading with the Commission to take the lead because they felt they couldn't. And I said, well, we both need to do this. So I think there needs to, we need to build on a sense of complicity between all walks of life and all elements of society who feel a responsibility for this. And the Commission will certainly want to lead on this, but if you look at the way our society sees governance, governance is no longer the exclusive right of government. Even stronger, I would say, government is not really trusted with governance by many parts of our population. So if you want to create a new sense of trust and confidence in governance, you need to get other people who are commenting on governance but are not part of governance to come into the fold, to take the responsibility, to be part of the debate. And that, I think, is part of the solution. We cannot do without leaders such as Merkel, who sticks her neck out in an incredible way, and others will follow that example. But we cannot do either with organizations, NGOs, the cultural sector, sports, all these things that attract people's attention and that do have an influence on how people see their society. Everyone needs to take part of the responsibility. In that sense, just as a quick sidestep, in that sense, the crisis of governance in international football has just as a negative effect on trust of people in governance as the crisis in a government or in international governance.
Thank you. So I'm going to make a plea for responsible short questions. I can take 3 questions. I'll take the gentleman here, Zoe, and I'm going to take Afzal. And I'm sorry, but the conversation will continue. We just don't have time for more, but very short questions. Please, here.
Thank you very much. I'm Luc Bas, the European Director for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which has member states and NGO members. So we try to work in that spirit of governance going beyond government. I want to turn the crisis management discussion, which is very important, to an opportunity debate. And if you look at the agenda that was just agreed in New York, the Sustainable Development Goals, I think that's a huge opportunity for Europe. It's a leadership opportunity, it's a breaking silos opportunity, and we would have a common project. So my question is, for Europe, because it's universal, these goals, what we will be doing in Europe and to strengthen our economies at the same time, and how we will take up a global responsibility. And to finalize, you're the coordinating commissioner, the vice president, to coordinate the sustainable development policies, which is a huge opportunity. Huge opportunity because it's the first time that it is at that level and not in the Environment Commission.
Absolutely. Mr. Timmins, if you could.
Well, on the Sustainable Development Goals, what is important here is that for the first time, it's not just about what we want the third world to do or other countries to do, it's also homework for ourselves. And what we're going to do now in the Commission is to be very precise on what that homework entails for European policies. And one of the areas, without going into detail, one of the areas where this will become essential is the energy sector. And I believe that much of what we can really do in terms of creating a common sense of purpose, of really bringing about a sustainable economy, of going for a circular economy, of creating more jobs, will be linked with the energy sector in Europe in the next couple of years. How, if we can quicken the pace of moving towards sustainable energy, if we can reduce the dependency of individual member states on individual energy providers, if we can build new grids for the energy sector, I think this is one of the most promising areas where we can combine the need to create jobs and growth with the need to create transition to a sustainable economy, with the need to show that Europe means something, not just for individual member states.
Thank you. Zoe, please.
Thank you. My name is Zoe Konstantopoulou. I'm the former president of the Hellenic Parliament. My questions are very direct and very brief. Are you proud of the way the Commission handled the Greek problem this summer and so far?
Yes.
Why? You are? Okay. Why does the Commission insist that the Greek debt is sustainable when there's substantiated evidence and reports, both by the Parliamentary Committee in Greece and the IMF, that the debt is unsustainable? Why does the Commission not support a debt auditing in Greece as provided in the European Regulation 472 of 2013? And why does the Commission not support the debate opened since 2014 within the UN on debt restructuring and principles on debt restructuring and debt relief, principles which, by the way, have all been violated in the case of Greece? Thank you.
First of all, I'm very proud of the Commission, and especially Jean-Claude Juncker's record on the Greek crisis this summer. We would not have had an agreement with Greece had it not been for Jean-Claude's leadership, and I'm very proud of that, and I will take nothing back from that. Secondly, the issue of debt relief. Now, we have an agreement with Greece. I think the whole issue will be seen in a different light if in a couple of months from now, Greece actually applies some of the structural reforms that are desperately necessary in Greece. You know, it is all good and well to only talk about debt restructuring, but if we don't talk about the issue of the essential nature of some of the structural reforms, debt restructuring will not help, because you will create new debt while you're talking about debt restructuring. So there needs to be structural reform in the Greek economy, in the Greek governance, if we are to see a different nature of the debate on debt relief. Once you will have that first step set, my feeling is that in essential member states, the issue of debt relief will be seen in a different light. And I can't be more precise than that, I'm afraid.
Mr. Davignon, I will give you the floor in a second. I just want to take one final... You want to come in now? Oh,
But
fine,
I
please.
would like an answer to my question on why the Commission is not supporting implementing EU regulations on debt auditing, and why the Commission is not supporting the UN debate on debt restructuring, because there's another forum, an international forum, where these things are being discussed, and the Commission is pressuring member states to abstain, claiming that the UN is not the appropriate forum. So I would like an answer on that.
You got my answer. You are about your questions. I'm about my answers. You will have to deal with the answers as I gave them to you. I think the Commission has been very generous to Greece. The Commission has been very helpful to Greece. And once again, the debate about debt restructuring can only have a meaning once there are real structural reforms in Greece. And we're still waiting for those. And I hope that Prime Minister Tsipras delivers on his promises, and then we can really have a debate about the other issues as well.
Thank you. Mr. Davignon.
I think going back to a comment that Mr. Timmermans made a few minutes ago, relating to the paradox over the fact that overwhelmingly there is an opinion that member states cannot do it alone, so that the European project is still very strong and living. The statistics show that. And at the same time, same statistics show that people are unsatisfied with what is happening. So the traditional paradox. But I would like to take it to Greece. It's a very fascinating story in relation to this. Mr. Tsipras, first time around, was elected on a program, which he got a big support for. Then we entered in the process of a negotiation, which ended up with a conclusion accepted by the Greek government, which was not, to use a British understatement, exactly in line with the program on which Mr. Tsipras was elected. These things happen. So a new election was called. And who won? Those who changed, and who lost, and I'm sorry for you, madam, and who lost were those who wanted to continue on the initial line. So democracy spoke. And I think it's important for this audience to know this, is that basically the necessity to have a common solution was what prevailed. And those who stick to the original program were those who failed. In terms of dynamism, this is not an uninteresting story.
Thank you for that. Mr. Timmermans, if you allow, I'm going to take two questions together. Yes, and then I'll take Afzal and then Suad. So Afzal, please, quickly, very quickly. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Vice President Timmermans, would you agree with me that the issue we're dealing with is more than refugees? When someone like myself, who is a proud Brit, who is a proud Muslim, and a proud European, and too many people feel that I don't belong here. And if you couple this with the refugee issue, with the environment that we're in, with the cuts the local level people are feeling.
Yeah, Afzal, you have to be short now.
The cuts that the local level are feeling, that it is absolutely vital there are sufficient resources so the local services are handled properly.
Yeah, thank you very much. Suad?
Thank you very much. Suad McKennett, I'm a young European leader and a journalist for the Washington Post. I have covered the so-called refugee crisis issue, what you want to call it, for the last couple of weeks. And I'm wondering, it seems to me that there is a little gap between what's happening on the ground actually and also the fears of people in Europe and some of the parts of the discussion I'm hearing here today. And I was wondering, Mr. Timmermans, how do you actually want to address the fears that people are having? How do you want to address the issue? And now we're talking about words. When you say we're talking about Syrian refugees, how do you want to address the fact that even the German Minister of Interior says that at least 30%, if not even more, of people who claim to be Syrian are not Syrian?
Right.
How do you want to address the fact that there are people traveling from other
Suad, if you want
countries?
an answer, you'll have to stop there.
This is just the last question. The fact that are people traveling to Turkey who are not Syrian, who destroy their passports and then just take the path on with the Syrian refugees and try to reach Europe. So I'm wondering, how are you going to address all these fears of people?
Thanks, Suad. Yeah.
On the first issue, how is it possible that part of the young generation born in your country, my country, etc., can be mesmerized, inspired, recruited by a death cult? How is it that the death cult can make them dream and we cannot? Is that not a fundamental question for this society? How is it that we're losing part of our immigrants, or well, they're not even immigrants by any definition, part of our minority populations to these death cults? I think this is a fundamental challenge to our educational system, to our social system. How is it that we have second, third generation young people saying, I'm not wanted here, but there, yes, they want me. They give me something to fight for, to believe in. So we need to find ways of making every single European, whatever his or her background, dream about their future here. I used to teach at a briefly, when being a member of parliament at a middle school in my country with many immigrant children, and my first question was always, what do you dream about? And there was shock on the faces of the children. Nobody had ever asked them what they dream about. And I think we have a serious challenge in our civic system, in our educational system, if we are not able to make our children, whatever their background is, dream about their future in our society and not be susceptible to be lured into an ideology that does let them dream about things they believe are good and right. On your question, it is absolutely clear that people try to abuse the system, and it is absolutely clear that we need to find some answers for that. It is absolutely clear that some countries now believe they can offload their Afghani refugees on Europe because it's working so nicely now with this refugee crisis. So we will have to do much better in protecting our external borders, in fingerprinting people immediately when they arrive, in making a distinction between people who deserve asylum and people who don't, and people who don't will have to be returned where they come from. There is no other answer to this. And it's all very well and easy to have other answers when you're on an island somewhere in the Pacific or on a different continent. But fences will not help. Other ways of approaching this will not help. This is the only way forward. And we're not doing this because for too long, member states where people arrived had been complaining about the fact that they were left alone. And then, you know, they stopped doing what they needed to do under Dublin, which is something I have some understanding for if you're abandoned for such a long time. So then what happened was that the red carpet was rolled out over the Alps and people came in without registration. Once, you know, this is a connected world. Once people elsewhere in the world see that this is an easy way into Europe, not only refugees will come into Europe. Let's not be naive about this. Not everyone coming into Europe is the refugees fleeing from war and persecution. But what we see the populist parties do, turn the argument around and say, because some of the people arriving are not refugees, we need to keep all of them out, is something I will fight against until the last moment of my public responsibilities.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Timmermans. Mr. Davignon, would you like to just say a few words and then we'll continue with the other conversation?
I know you have to leave, but I have two important points on which I would like to have your reaction. The first point, we've spoken a lot about refugees. Supposing, unfortunately, that the capacity of finding a solution inside the institutions is difficult, does not meet the challenge. Are we ready to do it amongst the countries who are ready to do it? Very complicated question, but I think we might come to that at one moment, because not giving an answer leads to my second question. I think what you said was extremely important, is that now we have to find out, do we have a common project? Globally, at the European level, not in relation to item A, B, C, or D. Do we still have? And I think the request by the British in relation to getting rid of an ever closer union obliges us to raise this question. And in my view, it will become clear that it may not deal with the whole 28 countries agreeing on this. And then we will have to look at what it means and not decide that we can't do anything before 2017, because this is the theoretical taboo. You don't touch anything legally or constitutionally till 2017. But if you don't have a constituency, or you lose your constituency with the risk of losing the project, maybe we will have to revisit that also.
Well, I would see the last question as a rhetorical question. On the first issue, I think every single member state deserves solidarity on this, and I think there should be no, we should do everything to avoid having to go into a different composition of those providing answers. Because I believe that if we abandon the idea of doing this at 28, those who are willing to do this will quickly lose the constituency at home to do it, because people, their voters will tell them, hey, you're allowing these other countries to be free riders, then we want to be free riders as well. So I think if we're serious about finding a solution, we have to do everything to keep every single member state on board, because if we don't, the issue of trying to become free rider will infect not just the relationship between member states, but especially the relationship between people in government in member states and their constituents. And they will be put under pressure in an already difficult time not to take responsibility. because others are not taking responsibility. So I'm afraid we're in this together.
We are indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Timmermans, for taking such a wide range of questions, answering each one in detail. It was a great pleasure to listen to you. Many of the issues you've raised, sir, are going to be discussed during the day. So people who feel frustrated and angry with me because I didn't take your questions, I'm a bad girl and I should be punished, you will have ample time to do this in the discussion that follows just now and during the day. So please join me in thanking Mr. Timmermans. Okay, so now we start off our conversation as well, and once again, brevity would be most welcome. We're going to kick off with another question from Debating Europe. This one is from Ioan, who is in Romania, from Romania.
We have a question regarding the governance of the eurozone. The former Polish foreign minister, Sikorski, once famously said that he fears German power less than German inaction. Would you agree? Did Germany's role in the Greek negotiation foster or diminish trust in Germany as a leading power for the EU?
I want our participants here around the table to answer that question. I think it's a very fundamental question that the young man has raised, and I was wondering if Anna or Andrula, anyone else would like to come in now and answer this question. Yes? Nobody wants to talk about Germany's role? Paul, thank you. Paul Taylor.
Paul Taylor, just a journalist. Germany's role. We'd have to, first of all, in response to the question, decide whether we think that Germany's role in the eurozone crisis was in fact leadership, or whether it was a very cautious kind of step-by-step, almost refusal to lead. And the thing about the relationship between the eurozone crisis, let's say, and the refugee crisis is that Germany gets it in the neck both ways. It gets it in the neck when it doesn't lead in the eurozone crisis, and it gets it in the neck when it does lead in the refugee crisis. And of course, some of us may wish, and perhaps I might even put myself among those, that Angela Merkel had bet more of the store on a more ambitious solidarity in the eurozone crisis, that she has now bet on a very ambitious moral leadership in the refugee crisis. And a lot of our friends from Germany around the table may be able to tell us this, but there's a sense that she has really put her political neck on the line in this crisis, and that it is by no means certain, although she still has very strong approval ratings, particularly in her own party, that she will prevail in this crisis, or that this crisis could be the end of her leadership period. So I think to sum up, I would say, be careful what you wish for, number one, about German leadership. Number two, where there is German leadership, I think that people are going to have to determine whether they wish to work with it or whether they wish to see it fail. And I was talking to somebody last night who shall remain nameless, but who said that if Europe continued with the current policy approach towards the refugee crisis of essentially what he regarded as almost an open door, an uncontrolled open door, which Angela Merkel, in his view, had launched, then there wouldn't be a government left standing in Europe within a couple of years except Mr. Orban's. I think that's exaggerated, but I think that it highlights the challenge that there is for European governments in this crisis. And we've heard a very strong argument this morning from Frans Timmermans for treating this first and foremost as a humanitarian challenge to our ability to integrate people who are refugees. But the political challenge, I think, is also a challenge to the survival of a lot of governments around Europe. And therefore, if the Commission's views are going to prevail, then a lot of governments are really going to have to pile in behind it, and I don't see that happening so far.
It's interesting. Thank you very much, Paul. It's interesting also that nobody has talked about the foreign policy side of this refugee crisis as well. The fact that there are wars and conflict and confrontation, violence on our doorsteps is why these refugees are coming to Europe. And nobody here yet, we will have a chance to do that later on, has actually brought up the foreign policy element of it. I had a question from you. Yes? No, yourself, please. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to comment on Germany very briefly, 3 points. The first one, I was amazed in the Greek crisis by...
could you just, I know you, but could you just introduce yourself?
Yeah,
very
Sylvie
quickly?
Goulard from the European Parliament.
Thank you, Sylvie.
I'm not German, I'm French, but I would like to stress the fact that there was a huge mistake, a huge historical mistake made in the discussion. I mean, either you are in the logic of the Traité de Versailles and you ask for reparations and you believe that you consider that the Germans have something to pay, or you stick to the logic of the European institutions, of the post-World War II decisions, which is to consider that cooperation is more important than retaliation against a former enemy. So, and this is something we should really think about. And I must say the Greek missed a fantastic opportunity. You had the opportunity to open a discussion on the macroeconomic decisions taken in the crisis. But because you put it under the wrong umbrella of reparations, Nazis, etc., you completely lost the German public opinion, you lost German Wolfgang Schäuble, you went too far, and this was simply not the logic of the European integration. And it was very interesting when Mr. Timmermans said, we should define what we want to do together in the future, but we should at least know what we have been doing for years together. The logic of the European integration is a logic of cooperation. It's not a logic of reparation, etc. And if you want to discuss this further, in the 2+4 treaty, which put an end, which was the external, the treaty on the external aspect of German reunification, there was not only the fact that we gave up any idea of reparations, but we fixed the borders of Germany. And if you want to play with these treaties, it can go very far. So I would say, first of all, if you don't want the German to be seen as hegemonic or whatever, please take them as they are since World War II. The second point is that in Germany, many people believe the strength of Germany is mainly an economic one. I don't believe it. The strength of Germany now is the strength of its democratic institutions. So Merkel is not deciding like the French president. She has a lot of, she has a duty of accountability. It is a society where you have to discuss in depth. And when you discuss in depth, you can change their position, really. But I know more people right now who are insulting the Germans in their own country than people going to Germany to discuss with the Germans in depth, to talk about the macroeconomic choices, to talk about the way you fight poverty. And if you just look at Germany from outside, not going to Germany to convince the people from inside, then this is also a second missed opportunity. And very last point, I wanted to say, of course, the key question now is the leadership on defense and security. It is not only on economy, it is the fact that we have to make a quantum leap on this. But because there are still these visions of what the Germans are not, it will be even more difficult, because I bet that if the German government would come with a big project to create a European army, some people would not appreciate this as leadership, but they would just say they are back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please. I'll come to you, Zoe, in a second. Please, gentlemen over there. I can't see very well, but I can see the hands going up. So, please, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. Daniel Diana, I'm with the Central Bank of Romania. I'd like to raise two issues. And I will refer them to the refugees crisis, but also to the euro area crisis. What I think is missing in the debate, and not only today, is the very limited capacity of the Union to strategize. Where are the forward studies? Where is the capacity to envisage what's going to happen? I'm not talking about an extreme event. The refugees crisis did not come from nowhere, from heaven. I mean, there has been substantial information about what's happening. It was clear that foreign policies were wrong. There were blatant foreign policy mistakes. So it was written on the wall, something very bad is going to happen. What happened in Brussels? What happened in Berlin? What happens in Paris? What's going on with the capacity to strategize? So it's like always the Union is reacting to crisis. We are in an ongoing, for years, crisis management exercise. So, and this is a fundamental issue. Now, and the second issue about the euro area crisis and the Greek episode is only an episode. It goes much more deeply. The euro crisis is because of the very poor design, very precarious policy and institutional arrangement. It's not about Germany versus Greece. Probably Greece, I want not to offend Greek friends, Greece probably was not prepared to join. It should not have been allowed. Greece would have been, in my view, much better today. So there is something wrong with the policy and institutional arrangement. It's not about Germany is about moral hazard and others are about solidarity. That's totally wrong. I mean, take the United States. The United States is a monetary union. Canada is a monetary union, and so on and so on. I mean, so there is no need to invent something. What's needed, badly needed, is to re-engineer the euro area, policy-wise, institutional arrangements-wise. I mean, there is the 5 presidents report. It is pretty bold in certain respects, but it's not clear to me that it's supported. So not everything boils down to Germany and Greece. It is much more fundamental. And if it's not solved in a proper way and in a timely way, I think we will continue to sink.
Thank you. There is a book out there which I think is worth reading called Europe's Orphan. I think some of the things you're saying are very relevantly, accurately put there as well. Andre, please.
Yes, I take this opportunity to ask my question I have been trying to ask to Mr. Timmermans. But building on what has just been said...
Just introduce yourself, Andre, please.
Yes, Andre Lezebourg-Pietri. I'm running a private equity fund. To answer the question of the young man on the screen, I think actually what Germany did and Chancellor Merkel did had a big resonance outside of Europe. And a little bit the problem, both of the question making, sorry, Shada, and of Brussels, is that the further you go from Brussels, the less we understand what's going on. But I can tell you that in China, and I think in the US, actually this move was finally a political move by the EU. You can agree or disagree. And the big disagreement I had with Mr. Timmermans, and I think you have hardly somebody who was more convinced about the role of the European Commission. No, I disagree with him. It's not about policies. Nobody gets excited about policies. People get excited about vision, people get excited about strategy. And let me list 4 things, which are the fundamental challenges. China. You have the Chinese president in the UK. What is the European policy towards China? We have this very embarrassing competition between all the member states about attracting investment from China. How embarrassing for Europe what's going on in London right now. Africa, the big thing of the next 50 years. 1 billion people more in the next 25 years. What is the European Commission policy on Africa? I don't hear it. There's maybe one somewhere deep. Digital transformation. I'm fed up about this Lisbon 2020. We are fighting Google. Now the new models is Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat. We always have one war too late. So I don't know who is strategizing about digital, but they don't get it right. And last thing about inclusion, education. What is the stand? We know that we are in a world of innovation, we're in a world of talent. What is the stance of the Commission? I don't think, I was a big defender of Brussels. I always said, oh, there are only 20,000, you know, or 30,000 European civil servants. I don't want to use the word bureaucrats. But if they just add up a layer to the national, I would say, more administrative layers, then it's completely wrong. These should be the think tank doing the strategy. Where is it? I can tell you, and that I'm an expert on it, on China, there is no strategy, and we have this very embarrassing, again, you know, rat race for who is going to be the best friend of China, and I think it's a major, major geopolitical mistake we do. And look what happened with the Asia Investment Bank.
Let's talk over coffee about this. I would like to come back to some of the issues you've raised, Andre. Zoe, please.
I must say I'm very puzzled to hear that Europe might, for some people, be all about preserving power for governments. Europe is all about ensuring the prosperity of its people and of its societies, and this is what was set out initially. To really talk about Greece, one has to know the facts, and I was also very puzzled to hear a very inaccurate storytelling by Monsieur Davignon. To talk about Germany's role in the Greek crisis, one has to be sincere about the facts. Ever since 2010, Greece is being subject to the memoranda policies. It's being asked through its governments which for 40 years were responsible for the economic situation in the country. It's being asked to implement the so-called structural reforms. The so-called structural reforms are a total violation of Greece's constitution, but that does not seem to enter into the debate, as if democracy was not important for Europe, but democracy is the supreme European value. To talk about the past and the future, one should say very clearly that the Greek debt was not restructured in 2010, even though Germany and France knew that the debt was unsustainable, but at the same time, they knew that their private banks were holding a big sum of Greek bonds. So for 2 years, the Greek debt was not restructured, even though it was in the IMF conclusions that the debt is unsustainable, basically to save German and French banks and to allow them to do away with Greek bonds. When it comes to historical conscience and talking about reparations, one should know that Greece was a small people, yes, but which did a great deal of resistance and is still a people which has never been, never received reparations for the atrocities and the Holocaust perpetrated in Greece during the Nazi occupation. And even though Greece was among, I'm finishing in one sentence. Yeah. Even though Greece was among the countries who gave a very big, a very generous debt restructuring, debt relief to Germany in 1953, precisely because confidence and trust can only be built upon this kind of solidarity moves, Germany failed to act in an analogous manner towards a country and a population whose debt was not linked to international crimes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would Mr. Monti or Mr. Davignon like to... Mr. Monti, please, yeah.
I'm not Greek. I've been following Greek events very, very closely, including for 18 months in the European Council, sitting next by alphabetical order to whatever Prime Minister was representing Greece at the meetings. I believe it is important for us to identify in your intervention the vigor that makes Greek such a forceful member of the European Union so dear to most of us, but also some fundamental misunderstandings about what the European Union is, which I believe is very rarely to be found in a former president of a parliamentary assembly. You say that the structural reforms asked for by the Memorandum of Understandings were against the Greek constitution. I have many reservations about what the Memorandum of Understanding was asking of Greece, especially in terms of asking for an impossible speed to do things. Is a serious fight against tax evasion, is a serious fight against corruption, is a serious commitment against the cozy relationship between economic power and political power, is a serious commitment to respect competition in the markets, something against the Greek constitution? I'm not sure. And lastly, Greece cannot believe that it has been unique in having some adjustments to make between its own constitution and belonging to the European Union. Many of our constitutions do explicitly recognize the supremacy of whatever is decided in the European Union relative to national constitutions, and we would be, I think, far away from truth if we would consider that an undermining of democracy. Democracy, since a few centuries, is no longer just a Greek construction. We believe that we have democracies in most of our countries, always imperfect democracies, and to comply with agreements reached in the European Union by definition with the consent of Greek governments, otherwise treaties would not be there, implies also participating in the democratic life of the European Union. And the view that you hold, and I'll finish with this, that because the Greek constitution says something, that is the last word for it, would of course imply the disintegration of the European Union, because...
It's not what I said, though, so...
Yeah. Mr. Monti, the microphone, if you're going to continue.
Much too long, and
Okay.
I say this with great sympathy. Myself, I've tried on several occasions when I had the possibility to do so, to act as a cultural mediator between Germany and Greece. but I wasn't aware of how tough the job could be with such strong Greek political personalities.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I really can't take more questions from, we have to move on. Please, sir, to your... There's a conversation over coffee, and we have discussions on this during the day. Please.
Žiga Turk from Slovenia. I think the fil rouge of some of the problems that we have in Europe is that the politicians have an increasing, their politicians are increasingly inclined to do what is known as feel-good politics. So stuff that feels good but may not necessarily be very wise. This was the Greek entry into the eurozone, and this is also Merkel's policy towards migrants. Just having moral leadership is not good enough. The result of this moral leadership is that people are suffering on the sea between Turkey and Greece. They are suffering on the Greek-Macedonian border. They are suffering on the Macedonian-Serbian border. They are suffering on Serbian-Croatian border, etc., etc., etc. And I also think that Mr. Orban would not mind if there was a train from Thessaloniki to Munich bringing those people into Europe in a humane way. So we have to organize this process.
Right. I think Merkel is not to blame for the people crossing into Europe. So I think that has to be clear. I'd like now to, yes, Monica, sorry, I had Monica come in.
My name is Monica Frassoni. I'm the co-chair of the European Green Party. Well, first thing I would like to say to my friend Mr. Monti that in our country there is a yearly corruption cost of 60 billion and a tax evasion of about 120 billion euros. So, I mean, you know, and that's something that we have been fighting for some time. So I believe that the fundamental problem that we had in the Greek crisis, we still have, is that there is not a recognition of the fact that the policy that was imposed in Greece, and it is still the mainstream in the European Union, is fundamentally wrong. Once we can accept this and take some different line, I think that it will be easier also to overcome certain emotional issues like the question of the war reparations that could have been considered to be probably not exactly particularly clever in a certain moment of the debate, but are a question that to some people is particularly relevant. But it's certainly not relevant, and there I fully agree, to solve the issue. But if we don't recognize that today the situation of the European policy on Greece and also in other countries did not really solve the problem, and that we have to take a different line, then probably we are never going to bridge those which are not only cultural questions, but are serious new and dangerous new divisions among European countries. And the last word on what the last speaker said, I believe that people who are now arriving at the border of Macedonia or of Hungary or in the Mediterranean suffered even more in Syria. Why? That is exactly why they came here.
Thank you, Monica. Mr. Davignon, you raised your hand. You don't raise your hand anymore. I had a question there, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Fiona Hislop, Minister in the Scottish Government. People see things differently, so thank you for putting the Scottish flag on the front of the Friends of Europe brochure. But the point of seeing things differently is that we all see things differently, and one of the concerns about the European Union is we spend so much time trying to get consensus and the lowest common denominator, we lose people in the process. And I think what will inspire people about Europe, and remember, I'm one of those that will be facing a ballot in the near future on membership or not of the European Union, is the language of solidarity and the energy and passion that we heard from the Prime Minister of Luxembourg last night, because that is what people will connect to. So I would appeal to you when you have those issues about, yes, crisis management is necessary, but political vision and political leadership is essential. And some of the big issues of the day that we can all work towards are tackling issues around climate change, energy security, and also how we tackle a future for our young people. I do not want Europe to be the old continent full of old people. I want us to lead in lots of different ways. And as a country in the far northwest of Europe, we want to stand in solidarity with those in the southeast. And our country and our government in Scotland has a Scotland Welcomes Refugee website. We want to take our share. But those are the values, and that is the leadership that will take Europe from being the old continent to be the new continent of the future. I think that's where we really want to get to.
Thank you very much. Guy, please.
Yeah, I just want to add a question to the same debate. I think we've been focusing on refugee...
Identify yourself, sorry.
Oh,
Igor
sorry.
is from...
Igor, I'm editor-in-chief of Mo magazine here in Brussels. And my question is whether we should not look more to the austerity policies of the European Union rather than just to the crises, because the financial crisis and the refugee crisis together create a kind of a perfect storm that is blowing away confidence in the European institutions. But underlying is the fact that European Union or European governments have not been investing very much in human development, while they have been very strict on spending and trying to push through an austerity agenda. I think that if we would turn that around and come back to a European Union that is investing in its people, then we would have dreams to be dreamt by young people of whatever nationality they were in originally. The fact that we're not doing that and then try to create dreams will not work unless we reinvest in human development, I think.
Thank you very much. Andrula, I'll give you the floor, and Jaap as well. I just want to show another Debating Europe clip. Perhaps will inspire you to also address those questions. So could we have Hannah, who is German, studying at the University of Leiden, please?
I would like to know how, in order to promote a common European identity among young people, if the EU history should be a bigger part in our curricula.
So, Andrula, I'll turn to you. I think this was a question that you can answer as well, as having been Commissioner for Culture and Education, but please, floor is yours.
Well, I have a feeling that we are going from one crisis to another. We started with Ukraine, we had the first Euro crisis, then Ukraine, then the refugee crisis in Syria, and I see that when the enlargement, the big enlargement in 2004, and then another 3 countries joined after the 10, what we should have done is to try and deepen our relations, deepen our European integration, because I see that there is not possibility to unite in our decisions. And I see here a fault of decision-making in the Council. So my proposal to the new Commission is that they should look into this matter and see how best we can find solutions which will be adopted by unanimity or majority, because you know, the public looks at how the decision-making process in the Council takes place. Long debates from 8 o'clock at night to 3 o'clock in the morning. And they think, is it possible, you know, to adopt serious decisions in such early hours when most of the leaders are falling asleep? So I think we should really give some serious thought of decision-making. Now, regarding this question, I have a feeling that we are not giving enough money and importance to education and culture, because from the studies that we have conducted, the young people who participate in our programs, in the European programs, I mean, let's remind ourselves that the Luxembourg Prime Minister, who spoke so eloquently about the European Union and its values, is an Erasmus beneficiary, and so many other young politicians who all are pro-European. So I think the emphasis should be on culture and education. And I am sorry to say, when I was struggling for some increase in the education programs and in the cultural programs, people were not very well responding. They gave some increase to their credit, but not enough, I think. I think we should build unity and understanding of the European Union through education. Thank you.
And of course, Erasmus has now gone global as well.
Exactly.
That's right. So, yeah, please, and then Bob. Yeah. Yeah.
I would answer the question that it would be extremely necessary and vital to study the history before the European Union came about. Because the European Union came about, I think, after all, because we had some experiences in recent history on the European continent. So that part of history I would recommend to that student. Second remark, I think there's not much added value in this morning analyzing here the Greek crisis in the sense of who said what and when and who did what and when. Prime Minister Tsipras decided to take the position he took. He was supported by the Greek Parliament. There was a third rescue package. We'll now see if the Greek people, the Greek government, will hopefully implement the reforms. End of story for the moment. Because there is an even bigger crisis ahead. And I want to react to your invitation that we are totally lacking a strategy to attack the root causes of the migration crisis, which is that we do not have even the beginning of a strategy for Syria. And I'll ask a few rhetorical questions. Should we talk to Putin about the future of Syria? Yes, we should talk to the Russians and to Putin. Should we talk to the Iranians when we try to find a solution for Syria? Yes, we should talk to the Iranians. Do I like that? No, I do not like it. But they are essential players. Putin has wrong-footed us again in Syria, as he has wrong-footed us in Ukraine and in Crimea. In other words, when we discuss Europe and European Union, and we discuss defense and security, which is always a sequel of foreign policy, by the way, then I think it should be up to the European Union to come up with any form of a strategy to attack the root causes. And as long as we don't do that, and the Americans will not do it for us, because they come in election mode. Obama made a colossal mistake by not enforcing his red lines, so the US do not have a strategy either. Let us, at least as Europeans, see if there's any way we can discuss the root causes of this migration crisis, which is a region on fire. And if we don't, and if we say we don't talk to Assad because he's a villain, which he is, we don't talk to the Iranians because we don't like the Iranians, the numbers of migrants and refugees will increase because the barrel bombs will keep falling.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I had a question from John, and then I have a question from Natalia. And Bob, sorry. First Bob, then John, then Natalia. Yeah.
Bob Cox, trustee, Friends of Europe. Two issues. One, the idea that the European Commission should do something about history teaching in schools. It's broadly felt in many circles that the European Commission does too much, and that possibly one thing that Mr. Timmermans is going to do is to reduce that. My question is, what does the Council of Europe do? If it doesn't, do we need it? Second issue on migration, and this in response, Shada, to your question about external policy concerning migrants and the situation in the Middle East. We often forget that many of these migrants coming here are in fact the talents upon which normally one should rely in some hopeful future to restore some form of civilization and polity to those particular countries. I wonder if there's not something we could actually think of trying to do at some level, not necessarily at the Commission, but some way to start training people both in those countries and among those who are coming here who might actually be future young leaders. I stress that name extremely carefully, given, in fact, the Friends of Europe involvement in the Young Leaders Programme. Right. Should we not be doing something to try to look ahead to this distant future?
Thank you, Bob. Good initiative. We'll follow up. I'm sure Gert, Natalie, and Giles and I will look into this. Giles has actually written a very interesting lead article in Europe's World, the latest version of Europe's World, on the refugee crisis and what it means for Europe, and I would really encourage you to read that. John, very, very briefly, Natalia, very briefly, because we're headed towards 11 o'clock, and I think we all need some coffee. So,
I just wanted to comment on the role of Germany and to say that it seems to me one of the reasons why Germany did seem to move rather slowly on the financial crisis was because it felt it was constrained by its democracy. It had to take its people along with it as the government made one decision after another. And yet we tried to rely on it because it was the biggest country. And we're now dealing with a migration crisis, the brunt of which is being borne by Germany. And I think we're now seeing, if you watch the German news now, we're seeing that it's running up against limits to what it can do there as well. My point is simply that if we succumb to the temptation to rely on Germany to solve our crises, I think we'll find it will not be able to deliver because it's a democracy. I think what we'll need in Europe to deal with our crises is the collective responsibility of 28 governments, all of whom will have something to contribute to each crisis.
Thank you. Are there people in this side? I've seen Anna put up her hand. Is there anyone else here that would, and I've got two hands going up here. I'll turn to you later, Natalia, but Anna, would you like to take the floor, please? Could someone take a microphone to, yeah, just go up.
On the refugees issue, I would like just to put on the table the correlation between the newcomers, the refugees in all member states, and the social state. I am a friend, and I know that already are some studies in place, that it will be impossible for the social state in many member states to respond to the new needs. So I think we have to discuss as soon as possible the role of changes in the infrastructures, in educational system, in health systems, in the benefits. And of course, in the coming years, there is a big discussion about the way that the social state will respond to new families, to new values in new families, because the numbers are huge, from Sweden to Denmark and from Greece to Spain. Thank you.
Thank you. Lady there, please, Clotilde, take the microphone. Yeah.
Hello? Okay. We've heard a lot of criticism.
Just identify yourself, please.
My name is Irene Tinagli. I'm a member of parliament in Italy. And I think many criticisms are about Europe and the inability to address important crises are correct. But I'm a bit surprised by the fact that nobody here mentioned also the achievements that Europe has done in these years. And as far as ill-designed could have been, or the recipes were all wrong, the austerity measures, but don't forget that still we helped saving countries like Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Italy as well. I'm not sure it would be here now, growing 0.9 and consolidating this fiscal situation if it weren't for European Union and rules and collaboration as well. So I think we should probably also focus on maybe understand why it worked better in certain countries and not in others, but it's recent institutions that many problems, but also some success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A lady over there, and then Natalia, and then we'll draw this session to a close, please.
Thank you. I'm Dana Reizniece-Ozol, the Minister of Economic Affairs of Latvia. Thank you for this great opportunity to discuss very important issues. And following the circle mode, I would come back to the two very important concepts that were raised in the morning by Mr. Timmermans, and that's the trust and solidarity. Within this concept of the decision-making process here in Europe, I think, and we all see how important there is to have this trust between the member states, and how to do that. It is really to strengthen the concept of solidarity. It cannot be a principle which you or the politicians take out of their pockets whenever some of the countries are needed to be forced to take some decisions they wouldn't be too much eager to take. Let me just use my own country as the example. I come from Latvia, which is actually have been very solidar. Take the crisis in 2008 and 2009. We really followed the strict austerity measures. We lost 10% of our people, but we understood that we have to be used also as the role model for the rest of Europe, for Greece, for example. Take the sanctions against Russia. We have been more than solidar in this context. Nevertheless, we are the country whose economy most probably suffers the most. But this is the first moment when the people in Latvia really are cautious and really are questioning whether we should or should not help to solve the crisis with refugees. It's not because we are not solidar, it's because we see that sometimes when we need to feel the solidarity, it's been triggered. I mean, look at the Ukraine, which is a very important issue to Latvia. Whenever the firework is a bit lowered in Donbass and all that, Russia put some bombs in Syria. All the attention has been refocused to Syria, not working enough on Donbass, and not mentioning that Crimea is not discussed at all. Energy.
Can I ask you to...
No, yes, I'm just finishing.
Thank
you. Just another example, energy. We know that Russia is using the principle of divide and rule in energy sector, but what we are doing here in Europe, while the right hand is writing the energy union strategy, the left one is building the Nord Stream 2. So it's the principle of solidarity is a two-way direction, a road of two-way direction. And if we manage to strengthen this concept, really strengthen it, then we build the trust to take the difficult decisions.
Thank you very much. Natalia, very, very quickly, because I want to turn to Etienne Davignon for his final comments.
Natalia Alonso from Oxfam. I think the debate has been quite Eurocentric about a lot of the symptoms more than the causes. So we're talking about the Greek crisis, economic crisis or stagnation, refugee crisis. Again, for whom is the crisis? The question is about how do we look at the causes, and has been mentioned here what has been the European engagement in the neighborhood about Syria, but what about Yemen right now, where over 0.5% of the population is food insecure? So that's the next crisis coming up. But also another cause that I would like to mention and hasn't been really dealt with is the question of inequality. 40%, the bottom 40% of the population in Europe owns less than 1% of the net wealth in Europe. And this is in Europe, which is the richest continent on earth. Therefore, what are the solutions? Because this inequality and this political engagement is not inevitable. We can change that. So there are a number of steps that are happening and that could be happening about transparency, about tackling inequality and providing services and education, and about a fair play, for example, on taxation. And I think this is food for thought for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. It is indeed. It's a question that's going to be dealt with in one of the sessions that I'm going to announce very shortly, but thank you for raising them here. Monsieur Davignon, your thoughts, please.
If I look back to previous sessions, it is the first time that an important leader, in instance Mr. Timmermans, has indicated that if we are not careful, the heritage is at stake. I think it is a very important statement. Does not mean that Europe will disappear, but it would mean that it could be a different Europe than the one we have dreamt of. And those who dreamt of it at that time were right to dream of it. I think it's food for thought, and it raises the second question that has come up this morning is, how do you define strategy if you have a constituency which is not interested in defining new commitments in terms of the policy they have to carry out? And I was very much struck by the fact that, again, Mr. Timmermans indicated that the distrust in between member states, for whatever reasons, some good or some bad, is certainly not the component which is necessary to define an element of strategy that has to do with foreign strategy. What do we do with China? What do we do with other? The third element is, that is an element that we've seen every time in our conferences, is that we are very great experts of explaining what we did wrong in the past. We study that in detail. We find out what we did wrong, when we did it wrong. I think it's interesting for historians, but we don't learn anything from this type of debate. And with all my apologies to Madame in relation to Greece, what interests me is the step forward and not what should have happened, did not happen, and could have happened differently. And I stand exactly by what I said on the podium before, is that the Greek people decided. And they did not decide in your direction, rightly or wrongly, and that is also democracy. They decided. If they had decided differently, the debate would be different. But they did not, I underline, did not, sanction Mr. Tsipras for accepting the agreement with the Union. And that is the end of this part of the story. So, a few things to discuss. I think we were right in organizing the program that we have now And we decided to have parallel discussions so that we could use to the maximum the contribution of those who are kind enough to sit with us this morning. We have this debate in relation to regaining confidence and so on, trust in the Union and so on. And when we look at the future, I think we have to ask ourselves a few questions. I think the question of education is a central question of education, is a central question for the Union. Mr. Timmermans raised a question which anguishes me as him, is how is it that young people who have lived in our countries for a significant period of time decide that their future is in a barbarian approach to civilization and not the one they knew. If that hasn't got something to do with education, then I don't know what has to do with education. All right, the powers of the Union are not that great in that direction. But some things that we have the legal right to do, maybe we should not do. And some things that we don't have to clearly define legal right to do, we should do. And I hope that these issues we will look at this afternoon. So enjoy your coffee break and back to work at 11:30.
Thank you. I have a few announcements to make. Please join me in thanking everyone. Now, I had failed to say, mea culpa, that this event is live streamed, so everything you said has been recorded outside this room for eternity. But hello, everyone out there. My apologies. There are two parallel sessions that will start at 11:30. So the first one, as Mr. Davignon said, is Public Trust in the EU. It will be held here in room Arenberg. Recovering Global Influence is on the ground floor library, so please make your way there. I would like you to be there, if you don't mind, at 11:25, so gulp down your coffee and then head there. Interesting discussions to continue. And the discussants and chairs of these two sessions, if I may just ask them to come to the speaker's room in about 10 minutes or so, that I can brief them a little bit about what lies ahead. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you. Coming from you, that's a real compliment.
How are you going to do? And it was the fur. It was good.
Thank you very much, Kensica. Comment vas-tu?